We'll get started then. All right, I'm going to go ahead and call this Special Rules Committee meeting to order. We have two topics on the agenda: review of Assembly P&P and review of Assembly goals/vision. We'll go ahead and start with the introduction, starting on this side.
Dyson.
Crystal Kennedy.
John Weddleton.
Pete Peterson. Forrest Duckwater.
Christopher Thornton.
Felix Rivera.
G. Ennis.
So let's start with the P&P. And just for the record, Mr. Gates is going to be joining us on the phone, so hopefully we have that set up for him. Okay, great. So first I want to review this changed P&P. We've made some changes based on the suggestions that we got a month or so ago. Go through the questions that were brought up at that meeting previously, and then have a discussion. So let's just start with that. So first, the big changes to this are in the scope, looking at, and I'm sorry, this isn't lined, but the second line in the scope paragraph, the first paragraph, excluding the municipal attorney or Department of Law. That was a suggestion that was made by some of my colleagues. And then E in this policy does not apply to was also, as well as D, were suggestions made again at the last meeting. So again, the municipal attorney or Department of Law does not apply to, and then contact from a municipal employee as a constituent. Actually, I don't know if that's necessarily what I intended. So, as a constituent, does that mean that they have to live in your district?
I don't think so. I actually think it's just outside of the role of
Okay.
the municipal employee.
Okay, great. Then, just trying to remember, it's been a while. Right, so we added in the policy in 3 paragraphs just explaining why the municipal attorney and Department of Law are unique and not included. I believe those were the substantive changes that were made. So I'm going to go through the questions really quick that were brought up at the last meeting. So first was regarding the municipal attorney. I think we've addressed that one. Second was what if the assembly is not politically aligned with the administration? And I think the short answer that we came up with there is that that is a situation that will work both ways. That sometimes the assembly and administration may have different political leanings, and I think the structures that we have in place allow for that, and those tensions are already in place, even when we have an administration that we agree with. So I think we can continue having a discussion on that, but I don't think that is totally going to be resolved by something like this. I don't think, nor should it. I think those are natural tensions. What's the hammer? There isn't a hammer. There is no sort of specific enforcement outside of the chair calling you up and saying, hey, you should follow this policy. But other than that, there is no hammer. Nothing here precludes MOA employees from contacting us. For the record, we've been joined by Mr. France. Yes, we included that in here.
Say that again.
So the question was brought up at the last meeting. Is there anything in here that precludes MOA employees from contacting us? And the answer to that is no. There is nothing in here, and we added that in the scope just to clarify that, right? MOA employees can still contact us. We're still allowed to have that conversation. So, guidelines, there was a suggestion to make these more as guidelines and not sort of black and white. And the response that I got from that is that, yes, these are guidelines, as evidenced by not having a hammer, right? We did keep the section around inquiries into the staff's regular position, duties, and roles, I believe. I don't think we made that change. And then conflicting policy with the admin and the assembly. Yes, the policies do conflict, and in general, when we had that discussion, we thought that was okay. The policies don't necessarily have to be in line. This is how we want to operate with the administration. So with that, I'm happy to open up any discussion so that we can chat about this. Yeah, Mr. Wells. Or, well, John.
I think this is helpful, because I think probably for many of us, before we got on the assembly, we were involved with things and we'd call whoever was responsive to us over the years. And then once we got on the assembly, I was, I think, generally adhering to this, just because I don't know if anyone told me to or if it made sense. But it was good to have it prepared. I think one thing that I'm not sure where it would fit in, but there's kind of leaders of the unions. You build some relationship with at some point. But so like when we have this thing with the new policy with the fire overtime, well, I emailed Mike Stumbaugh and said, hey, what do you think? And it just seemed like a natural, but he's a municipal employee, not a department head. But that seems appropriate too. Given his role, where would that fit?
Well, my concern there is that so much of the outreach and contact with unions, if it's in or around negotiation time, sets off a whole bunch of other rules that you can't. So you have to be very careful. And isn't that when most of those questions are going to come up? I know
we
that,
talk to the union heads all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I know that. And so I'd almost have to pull our labor attorney down here if you wanted more outlines with that. So I guess the contact is not the issue. It's the period of time or the type of question.
If we're in negotiations with the IFF and I call Mike Stumbaugh on something somewhat separate, here's a new policy, what do you think? You want to get the full story.
The negotiations.
It is so, and would that be okay?
Well, really, I'd rather call Blair down here if you want further input on that, because it's an area fraught with risk and national labor stuff. And I'd be glad to bring her down here. She's here.
It might be, but I think that's something doable.
Yeah, I think there are some of us that have maybe different opinions on that.
I'd like to hear the different opinions.
Yeah, Forrest, go ahead.
Great to have her come down.
I guess comment and two questions. Comment is, if there's a policy and the answer is you cannot speak with members of the fire and police union, then I just won't follow your policy or support your policy.
Yeah.
Because it's a different entity basically.
Yeah.
The question on process: do you intend to just impose this as the chair, or are you going to attach this to a resolution and have us vote on it?
That my intent is to attach it as a resolution. For vote. Yeah.
Okay. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I don't know how I'll vote on it when it happens. There are certain key personnel that are not directors or managers or chiefs, and the one I'm thinking of is Nancy Burke. I don't think she's a director of anything. She's the homeless coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
But I talked to her directly, and I think it would be a strange policy not to talk to her directly. And I think there are other people, and we could think of them, there are probably other people that fit that kind of description. So where does someone like Nancy Burke fit in here?
Can I ask, Bill, do you mind sharing?
Yeah, go ahead.
Bill? Forrest is bringing up, what about people, like right now this policy talks about directors, general managers. What about people like Nancy Burke, and I assume that would be Jason, and those people you could just go talk to freely anyway, but what about like the Nancy Burkes and they're head of discrete sort of programs and areas, and you need open contact with them? I mean, does the policy need to address that? It doesn't prohibit contact with those people. Any ideas, Bill?
I don't have an opinion on the policy because I'm not very familiar with the policy, I would say. But you're right, Nancy Burke is not head of the department or chief of anything, so it's a different category. It may be that we will have a rule that will address folks who are reporting directly to the mayor. That would speak as Jason and Nancy.
And you'd have free contact.
So it's my interpretation of this that there's nothing that prohibits us from talking directly with Nancy or with Jason. I think it's what this is saying is that the parity standard might not be to include Ona as Nancy's director in those communications. And Dean, can you confirm if that's correct? And yeah, Chris, I guess. Well,
Sorry, could you repeat that last part?
That
Confirm the what? Sorry.
Sure. So when we are contacting subordinates like Nancy, which I believe Nancy reports directly to Ona, unless I'm wrong, that when we reach out to Nancy, the courteous practice would be to CC Ona so that she is aware of that communication. Is that correct for interpretation of this policy?
I think that was something we discussed, and it was one of the ways to comply with the policy. CC the principal exec or director that's superior to that employee. The first sentence of Part 3 of the policy should communicate with the exec or directors when requesting information or tasks from subordinates. And I think CC is sort of, I guess, I would interpret that as also including that director or exec, principal exec in that communication.
Thank you. Chris?
So it's no secret, of course.
Sorry, I was talking about that, Chris.
Okay, go ahead.
Chris Judy, Director of Economic Community Development. I only heard bits and pieces of what Dean said, but I think that comports with our understanding. It says principal executive, right? So I believe the actual reporting structure for Nancy is directly to the mayor, although she coordinates through it quite a bit. But I think anybody on the 8th floor in a Nancy-like position, myself, Jason, Ona, et cetera, I think would be considered principal executives. So you wouldn't have to, for example, go through the mayor to communicate directly with Ona, et cetera. So I just would offer that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a good interpretation. Chris?
Thank you. Starting again, it's no secret that I strongly have. Go ahead, Dean.
This is Dean.
Go ahead.
I suppose one way to clarify, I think, all appointees within the mayor's office is to add that in the definition of principal executive. Right now, it just says chief of staff. Perhaps it should say chief of staff and others in the mayor's, other executives appointed in the mayor's office. So I think that would a little change to that. It's in page 2 definition of 4B, or if we tweak it to include a clarity that it includes Jason and Nancy, who are appointed by the mayor and work in his office. Perhaps that would. Just a suggestion to resolve this ambiguity.
Thank you. And so, again, I want to reaffirm, sort of before we really get into, we got to add this, we got to add that these are guidelines. But go ahead, Chris.
Thank you. Once more, third time's the charm, hopefully. Again, as I stated twice now, strongly in opposition to the framing of this. And I have stated I would conduct my own interior policy of civil disobedience if in fact this became our policy, because I am not willing to cede any more power to our very strong mayoral power government that would say we are beholden to the administration to ask questions of a strategic nature, of matters that are important to ourselves as elected representatives of our constituencies in the city. However, I could see if this is not in fact a directive, but is in fact a recommendation, that with some slight verbal changes it could work. And that slight changes would be to establish a policy recommendation regarding assembly members' contacts and communication. The co-equal branches of our local government function best when they communicate with each other with respect and professionalism. The assembly members are recommended to use appropriate channels. And then down under policy, it is recommended that individual assembly members communicate. With those language changes, I could support this policy, because then it would reflect what we're talking about here, as opposed to a dictate.
Sure. So I would agree with those changes and state that I don't think there's any substantive difference.
Except the words.
Yeah, sure. But I think it says the same thing either way. But yeah, if you could email those changes to Dean, I'd be okay with making those changes in here.
Because then I could support it.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, John.
Okay. Another thing I might add is that this, I think somewhere to our contacts and communication in our role as assembly members, because I have tons of, I bump into people all the time, and where's Bosco stuff, you know, and that's very different. I am kind of careful there because you don't want me being on the assembly to influence the result. So, but anyway, but it's very different. So I'm talking to people running a road project or
Where's
art
that line?
and so on.
What line?
Well, I don't know. It's not in here. Oh, I would right at the end. Establish a policy regarding contacts and communication with administration employees in our role as assembly members.
End of which paragraph?
Sentence 1.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. I'll include that.
Thank you.
And then I may have a couple of other issues. One is, you know, what about when the communication starts with the staff member as opposed to, like if we're working on something and someone from HLB who's not Robin Ward or something, but we've been working on a project or something, and there's an email from them, and I have to admit, I would start a conversation myself, I'd CC the director, but now we're going on, and we can get pretty far along without having that director involved, because I just hit reply all, and it's just one person, so some way I'd be in bridge with this, but it would be something that the director would know this is an ongoing thing. And the third point, more to Chris's, is it's almost like these guidelines would be the mayor to the mayor's staff. Say, okay, when assembly members contact you, you should then, and I've seen this happen too, CC your supervisor. So it really is on them to do that.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, the mayor does have a policy that is followed. I think it's an old policy from several administrations ago. And I think the policy is sort of followed loosely because it's very strict and I would say draconian, that policy. So I think this policy that we have here, I think it's important for us to figure out how we want to communicate. And then it's important for the administration to figure out how they want to communicate. And I don't think there's any reason why we can't each both have our own forms. Actually, I have Fred next, and then I'll get to you, and then you.
I, like Chris and Forrest, I thought I'm going to bridle at this and so on, and I think it's really well done. And I liked at the end of the first paragraph under 2, when it says, when such requests require state staff time for research, finding information, periodic analysis, and so on and so forth. When we're going to take the staff's time, you know, I think that their management needs to know, and all of us should be, and I try to be really careful to say, look, I just want a piece of information, back of the envelope accuracy, you know, don't take any time. And sometimes with Chris and all the time with Rada, you know, that was true. And that's my responsibility. The same way, and I do this with our own staff, to say, look, I owe it to them to tell them the priority. You know, this one doesn't have a short fuse here, an expiration date. You know, that's our responsibility. I have, at times, I mean, I treat some of municipal employees as backdoor whistleblowers, you know, and so on and so forth. But I have said to them, are you, is this information I've got from you, I assume it's confidential and you wouldn't want your organization people to know? Every one of those has said, no, that's fine. You know, and this administration is less paranoid and controlling than probably anyone I've worked with. Bill Starr, my predecessor, said, these are really easy people to work with. I'm not pandering when I say that, you know, but it shows professionalism, and these people are pretty secure, you know, they're not touchy. And also, you know, you all have put me on the audit committee, you know, for whatever reason, but I have solicited from you and public and employees what are things we ought to go audit, you know, because those folks know stuff that I am in no position to know. And a couple of the things we're working on, you know, can come from those kind of sources. But I think it's well done. And, yeah.
Thank you, Fred.
Thank you.
D.
Okay. 2 comments from John.
Oh, wait a minute, one more thing. Yeah, I got into this when I was involved with the state. And I said, state isn't following the law. Went to the Attorney General and said, will you go after him? And the Attorney General said, no, I'm the governor's lawyer. You know, I work for the governor. Fortunately, our predecessor gave us our own lawyer, you know, and so on. And I believe, Mr. Gates, correct me on this, but I believe the Assembly has a standing in court. Is that correct?
Yeah, there was a.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
That question for me?
Yes.
Yes, as Assembly Counsel, my duties are defined in code. It doesn't include litigation, so the municipal attorney would be standing in court for the Assembly. And unless, I guess, there's a lawsuit between the Assembly and the executive branch, and we have had that before about the veto power. And in that case, we would contract outside counsel to stand in court for the Assembly.
Yeah, and
Not the Assembly Council.
so this has come up for me because do we have the authority to exercise a FOIA request, freedom of information? And we do, and so on. But we can't, only if it's a city organization or they get city money. So we have that authority, and I think it takes an action of the Assembly to proceed with it.
And I want to be clear, so I don't think we actually have to go do a FOIA because we have subpoena powers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which are close, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pardon my carrying on there. Those are important issues.
Yeah. D.
Okay, just 2 responses to John. One, I think the CC, the department head, goes a long way to solving the whole problem. The person's aware, and then for resource allocation and just professionalism. So that's the biggest thing. I ask that of my staff as well. Get something from the Assembly, at least let the deputy know. And that just takes care of so much of this. Second thing is with the unions. I thought about that. Unfortunately, I can't get Larry down here. Unions are separate organizations. They're not MOA, so of course you can have contact with them. And my more esoteric question about negotiations, that's a different world, so let's not even go there. If you ever want a work session on that, that's fine. But certainly, unions are not the MOA. You can contact them directly.
But those are employees, so.
Well, but you're not contacting, if you're contacting a union in the capacity as a union steward, that kind of stuff, president of the union, versus you're not contacting them in their capacity as an employee.
Yeah. Good.
Thank you. Chris.
You know, just interesting conversation. And this is, again, no discredit to Mr. Falsey, who I turn to a lot for information. But it's interesting when we're sitting here contemplating this policy, we're actually asking them to tell us how we communicate with the administration. That's just something I would note. And I understand it goes to the good relations, but also it is important for us to approach this as a separate branch.
So, I want to, not to be contrarian, but there's a reason that Bill hasn't seen this. Is because we didn't, when developing this policy, we didn't ask the administration, how do you want us to work with you? We developed this over months, independently, and really painstakingly looked at how do we want to talk with them. We didn't take their opinion, no offense, into account. Okay.
I'll get you my notes.
Thank you.
I don't have the raw form. Someone can send me the Word file.
Dean, if you can send the file to Chris, he has some edits that he wants to make.
The policy Word document?
Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you.
I'll send it right now.
I interject.
Oh, sure.
Would you guys be able to project a little bit louder, especially since Dean's on the phone and he's using essentially a teleinterpreter? Volume, right? A little bit louder, please.
Got it. Will do. All right. So I assume we don't have any more discussion on that topic. Okay. So then let's go ahead and move on to goals. And so at our last Rules Committee meeting, I think maybe it was the one before that, we started reviewing the goals. And we did have a chance to complete homelessness, that priority. And so we have the remaining 3, and then we will have an additional 4th once the communications pillar is done with that work, and we'll get that in November. So for members who weren't there at our last meeting when we went over homelessness, I'm going to just very briefly go over how these are framed, and each of them has the same type of framing, and then we'll just go bit by bit and get thoughts from assembly members. So I'm just going to start with economic development, talk about the frame, and then we'll go through economic development. So each of these has opens up with sort of a history of what the assembly has focused on and in this particular area, and a history of who the other entities are that have also worked in this and what work that they may have done. I will note that this shouldn't be an extensive history. This is just sort of a brief brush of what's happened. Then we go into how the discussion went in our various groups, and the notes of those discussions are also attached here, the 3 different meetings that we had. Then we go into our goal, and again, we had one of the meetings there. I tried to do my best to combine all the different goals that we came up with into one thing, so let me know if it works or not. Then we go into questions that we might have. Role, so what is the assembly's role? Again, that's been a big discussion topic recently, is what is our role in all of these things. Then we go into short and long-term goals, who we need to work with, and lastly, we end with the accountability piece, which again in our last meeting was a big part of what we talked about, is how are we accountable to actually making sure these things move forward. So that's in draft form how each of these is phrased, but just like we did with homelessness, we moved things around, and that's totally fine. So any questions on that before we delve into it? Okay, so then let's go ahead and start with econ, and let's start with the history, which I think, just re-reviewing this, is the first 4 paragraphs is history, both internal and external, what's been done. So this one is a little bit more extensive, I think, than some of the other ones. Any thoughts on there? Is that broad brush adequate?
You're talking about paragraph 1.
1 through 4.
1 through 4. Just any additions and so on. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
You know, I'd add some on these groups. BOMA, which has been quiet recently, but is not always quiet, Building Owners and Managers Association.
Yep.
It's a national thing we have in Anchorage.
Okay.
But that's a real resource we have not seen real active recently, but can be. And then on this third one, line 4, you say needlessly drive up costs, and often that's the perspective. But I would say in most cases where you have a code requirement or building thing, is generally not needless. There's some benefit, but is that outweighed by the increase in costs? And is someone could say, look, that landscaping, you don't really need that landscaping. It's a perfectly good house without that landscaping. But there's a real benefit to that landscaping. So needlessly is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, so I started that paragraph with perception, because I think that's a really important piece. So to clarify then, should I add an additional sort of perception, right? There's the perception of this thing happening.
Possibly. You could just delete needlessly and say, that's our discussion. Okay, they tell us,
Got it.
We know we really like all that landscaping and the development and some of the building, but that much landscaping does X.
Okay.
So seek that balance somewhere.
That's a good suggestion. Word deleted. All right. Seeing no other thoughts on that, then
Excuse me, are you
Oh, sure.
moving past economic development?
No, I'm just moving past the first 4 paragraphs. So the next section we'll go through is how the discussion went. So that's the paragraph starting the assembly discussion round, ... Is that an adequate interpretation of the discussion? Yeah, go ahead.
Just a comment. I'm
Hi,
not
you
sure
know,
where this would fit in. I was looking at it last night, and I had a spot for it, but I didn't bring it. But we do have an administration had a report on this, referred to as the Bendon-Adams report, one word. And that's a guideline that they're following, and we're going to have an update. And I think our next Community Economic Development Committee meeting on it. But it's somewhere in there. I think that's
Sure.
would be useful. Just
Okay. Yeah, Fred.
I've always been enamored with the ability to develop the whole port, that whole area down there underneath the AC couplet, that whole thing. And I'm familiar with both Seattle and San Francisco, what they've done with their port areas and stuff. So have we sufficiently identified that as an extraordinary economic opportunity?
So it does have in here solidify our plans for the Port of Alaska, sort of as a piece of the conversation that we had when we talked about this, and then
Yeah, and I think most people think of port as just what is within the port boundaries now.
Sure.
And there's all that part to the west and south of that.
So do you have a specific suggestion for an addition? Do you want to broaden that scope?
Yeah, I want to broaden. The railroad is often talked of moving the reclassification yard and a whole bunch of their footprint down there, out of there, and maybe to Birchwood, but wherever. And that land would just be inordinately valuable. And oh, by the way, don't dodge your subtle grins here. I don't think of the railroad as an attractive addition to the Birchwood area. There's a lot more, I would think, better ways for that land to be used.
Okay. Yeah, I made a note, and we'll see how we can do that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So then, moving on, and I will. I understand this experience is sort of a tedious one, so I apologize. But I'll try to move through this quickly.
Maybe
Yeah.
just add Ship Creek.
Okay.
You know, that probably would cover it.
Suzanne.
Thanks, Felix. I guess a question to the group. I know that we talk about being more autonomous from the state's economy, and we don't necessarily call that out here. Would we somewhere in here want to say we want to maximize local economic autonomy, or I'm not sure I'm putting that out there. I can't remember if we talked about it in our previous sessions.
So we did talk about sort of. We did talk about it in one of them, and maybe it was quality of life that we talked about it. That we need to insulate ourselves from the changes and not reduce our quality of life. But I would be totally game with adding something in this one for it.
Okay, I'm not sure the best way to phrase that, so as not to come across as needlessly contentious, but I mean, it seems valid to want to be as economically autonomous from other levels of government as possible.
Sure. Yeah, Christy.
Chair. Thank you. I guess in thinking about that, I mean, I certainly understand the idea of having to be a little more self-sufficient, but at the same time, Anchorage, just by its very nature, has a tendency to bring in people from all over the state. So I don't want us to think that we've got to take care of everybody that comes in here. They don't really live here, but they might come in for services or for a certain period of time. So I don't want us to give the impression that we don't want any kind of state or federal funding that might help to deal with some of those specific situations. So how do we balance that in terms of that kind of language? Because I do think we're going to continue to be the hub for whatever. And you know, that's just the way services work. That's the way our hospitals work. And then a lot of people using the hospitals are obviously using other infrastructure in the community while they're here for that. So anyway, there really is definitely a connection that we have to be aware of and recognize that we do need help.
Yeah, thank you for providing that perspective. So I have made a note here to be careful about how we frame it. I don't want us to get into the word and smithing of it now. I will do that on my own. But I've made that note. Yeah. Pete.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So where would we put something in here about diversifying our economy? I mean, if we could, of course, this has been a problem since the beginning of the state of Alaska. You know, we have a lot of resources and they end up being shipped out of state before they're developed. You know, we have to figure out a way to create some value added to our commodities before they're shipped out.
Yeah, so that's an Alaska perspective, but what does diversifying economy from an Anchorage perspective or a municipality perspective look like?
Well, since we're the largest population area, and you know, the transportation center, the medical center, whatever, we have some advantages there. And so, you know, I think, you know, the fact that we have diversified some since 30-some years ago when the economy tanked real bad has really benefited the state, so that we're not in that, you know, downward spiral as bad as it could have been. But I think we still have to try to figure out ways to continue that diversity, because it not only helps us, but it helps the entire state.
Okay.
Chris? I just was going to make sure that statement got in there, that it might be worth noting that there has been a focus on the diversification of our economy for the last 30 years that did buffer us from the hardest hardships that could have come in this current recession. And so maybe some language toward the history and the continued work.
Yeah. Thank you. Sorry. John, and then I'll go.
Okay, I have a number of things, but just maybe just bouncing off of Pete's comment.
Sure.
You say diversify, it's like, okay, should we have barley farms and cattle? That's not really our thing, and that's what the state's done. But maybe diversify, recognize that we're the hub city for most of Alaska. And how do we provide more and more services for that? We have the port, we get the airport, and so on. What else do? We have the office buildings here. And that would be almost where our diversifying would be, increasing and fulfilling our role as the hub city.
Okay.
Which is happening a lot. We are more and more. Sometimes to our detriment.
Fred? And then I got you, Chris.
Yeah, so I hope some of you are here for a long time.
It's definitely
but
the detriment.
I would caution you to be wary of committing much funds to new industries on the theory that if we build it, they will come. Our state has some amazing stories of doing that stupid thing. Up in the interior, the barley and all that kind of thing. By the way, that's finally getting economically viable. 30 years later, the Taiwanese fish plant out at the end of the airport, I was involved. That thing was way down the road, and they had changed government in Taiwan. Everything went in the ditch in an hour. You know, with those kind of things. Matsu Port, God bless them. You know, but a huge amount of money. The intermodal Ted Stevens thing out at the airport. You know, wonderful idea. You know, but it ain't working. and so on. And then the other one that looked to me like a marriage made in heaven. We build this experimental Navy vessel in Ketchikan and get all of that, and then we give it to the Upper Cook Inlet up here, and that's got to be the best illustration of a moondog that went in the ditch and so on. And oh, by the way, when I sat here 30 years ago, I had a study done on ferry transportation at Cook Inlet, here, Matsu, and all the way down to Kenai and so on. It cost $50K, I think. And it said then it won't work, and it'll never be economic. And the ice environment here and the tides had said it won't work. You know, and I asked the guys when they were looking at that, and they said, "Oh, what was that?" And dredged it out and so on. But just be wary of those kind of things. And our major role will be eliminating barriers. And the private industry is very good at figuring out how to make money and where there's a market for certain stuff and so on, and not build much infrastructure till they've got a lot of skin in the game, you know, and it's very likely to happen in a relatively short period of time.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, I was gonna play with the barley idea as well. One of the proposals for the old hospital site was put in a winter barley farm so that the local breweries could make an Anchorage beer. And so, yeah, 30 years later, it might actually work.
Yeah,
So
I'll buy into that.
Exactly.
I don't think you produce enough barley to make much beer, and that will.
Hops too, though. Hops are an essential and very high value ingredient that could be done on the same site.
But my friend was getting to make it work.
Yeah, there have been suggestions in cannabis, but Anchorage is not ready for that. Anchorage is not quite ready for that. Yeah.
We have greenhouses.
Whoever's listening to the recording, just ignore this section.
Opium poppies.
All right, thanks, Chris. Suzanne?
Thanks, because we're really taking off. And actually, as we go along with this, it seems like goals come in faster than we can get stuff published. And I was just thinking of, like, you know, the Port of Alaska is mentioned here, and how, you know, we've talked about broadening the stakeholders, so it truly is seen as the Port of Alaska. I don't know if that's something we would include yet. It's premature, but at some point, it seems like it is an economic goal. Maybe that's something to put in the parking lot.
Well, in the parking lot there, the thing I've been thinking about on that topic is it might be essential that we create a separate plank down the road when we're done with this process that addresses massive utility and other large-scale projects that would include things like the conversation about the waste burning, and that would include the port MLP, and all of those items, like kind of have a visioning process for those large-scale, multi-year, multi-decade infrastructure projects. But it just wasn't a priority under our major primary topics.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that those items may, in fact, drive themselves to a separate pool altogether.
And I would suggest that, I think, maybe to a smaller degree, some of that should be considered in communications.
Yes.
In how we do that. And I think, you know, we are getting used to thinking about it project specific, right? The port, and okay, how are we going to deal with this? Swoo. How are we going to deal with this? Swoo.
Cover your ears now.
Right. So I think we're getting good at doing it in sort of insular projects, but I think you're right, having sort of an overarching how we're going to deal with these things discussion. What's would be good? Yeah.
I had a second point.
Yeah.
Since several of us participated in the RED Summit on early childhood education, and how you know, there are tremendous economic impacts associated with workforce development and quality childcare, and at some point, I think that may be a discussion that fits here.
It is
Might
an
be for the
economic
parking
engine.
lot,
Yeah.
But I recognize, you know, as a group, we haven't had an opportunity to discuss and agree that that's necessarily one of our goals.
I saw the movie. It was fun.
Yeah.
No Small
No
Matter.
Small Matter. Yeah. Yeah, and actually, so preview for the next work session, Trevor Stories is actually going to be here talking a little bit about some of the same things that you talked about, and really going into ACEs, because I know that's one of the priorities that we had talked about, is funding ACEs work, and so he'll be here to talk about that. Crystal.
Thank you.
If we can, I want to kind of get back a little more to the narrative on that first page, the 6th paragraph where it talks about the municipality cannot control the level of economic development. I would argue that. I think that that's exactly what the municipality has a responsibility to do, is to, in some ways, control economic development. And either we do it well or we do it poorly. But that's why we have rules and regulations, that's why we have licensing, that's why we have taxes and the tax rate. And I mean, I think that is exactly what the municipality does. And I can see where you're trying to say that, you know, obviously the business world is kind of on its own and the market should be driving a lot of its own business growth, but that's not necessarily, the municipality is to a certain extent controlling that.
So
Either.
could we say maybe something like, we maybe play a part in that, but we aren't the primary driver
We
of it?
absolutely have a role,
Okay.
absolutely,
Okay.
yes. Absolutely.
Then if we're okay, I can see about framing that, and we have a part in it, but
Okay.
we're not the driver.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the verb control is not the right verb to use.
That's it, it's the control part, that it's like, you know what,
Oh, sure.
to a certain extent, we do.
But we have
The
some
municipality does. And then just in following along with that, the next sentence says, the assembly will work to create a culture that identifies barriers. And I appreciate the sentiment there, and I understand it, but I'm thinking, are we working to create a culture, or are we working to identify barriers? Because to me, there's an action there that I'd just rather go straight to, let's identify the barriers, rather than work in some kind of a realm where we're trying to get others to identify the barriers. I guess that's, you know, whose role is this and what's the responsibility is, I guess, what I question out of that one.
Got it.
So,
Thank you.
thank you. That was it.
Yeah, Forrest.
You put page numbers on this?
Yeah, I can do that.
And lines.
What page? What?
Hey guys.
I don't need line numbers. What page are we on right now?
Priorities, economic
So
development.
we're still on the first page of economic development.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, you should have it. Sorry, John, were you in the queue?
Yeah, I have some stuff on the other page, but while we're here, and that same sentence Crystal was mentioning, however you word it, while the municipality cannot control the level, we do have a clear goal in mind. Where is that clear goal?
And that was my, I forgot about
Yeah,
that. That
so-
was a question too.
Yep. So the way that I usually frame that particular paragraph is sort of first sentence is, okay, the big frame, second sentence in the paragraph is the goal. So that the assembly will, and that sentence is an amalgamation, my best attempt, of the different goals that we had talked about during that one meeting. And so you can see the goals if you look at the goals meeting appended to this. The first, those 2 bullet points are really 3 for whatever reason, the third one didn't get bulleted. Those 3 bullet points are the goals, and so I did my best to match those into one. Not good enough, though, I
I'd
guess.
look for kind of priorities, economic development, goal. We can kind of thrash out some, and then the narrative below.
Yeah, so
It's hard to
you're
do.
doing the same thing that you did with homelessness, John, and I get that.
I did.
So, yep, you did that with homelessness too.
I'm consistent.
You said move the goal up to the top, damn it. You didn't use that word.
I'm glad I didn't give you
You
an
meant it.
opposite.
Yes.
No, you're not conflicted.
Okay, got it, understood. Okay, so then moving on, the questions, are those questions adequate? I don't want to develop the list of 50 different questions, by the way, but are those questions adequate to get to what we're looking for as it relates to the goal? Do we need to frame them differently, or do we need to add a couple? Yeah.
You know, you're talking about barriers and roadblocks, and in some cases, it's limitations forced on us from outside of our own community, and I would say conflicts with state. You know, I'm kind of looking at some road projects that the state they're going to do. You know, DOT's got big plans, and it's going to impact us, and we're going to spend tens of millions of dollars to try to retrofit our roads to coordinate with what they're doing. So I don't know how we can really state that, but it's not necessarily a barrier. It's a restriction or, anyway. So, so maybe just another term in there that will actually reflect some of the things that we have to deal with just because of other people that are, or other entities that are impacting us.
Right. Do you, since we're adding other entities,
Not in my area, it's more here in Anchorage. Okay.
did you want to
Sorry.
include feds in there or just focus on the state?
You could do both. No, I think both is fair.
Okay. Any other thoughts on the questions?
Anyway, we should.
Okay. Then moving on to assembly role. I know this one's always a lively discussion. Are we okay with the framing for the role of the assembly on this one? And then after this, we'll take a break to get lunch because I know I'm hungry. Yeah, John. Yeah.
I don't think it's tragic, but as well, convene and facilitate discussion as well as explore. Really, what we're goal is to create policies that, and on the road to creating a policy, you explore. But this, I mean, our role is to create policies.
Sure.
So,
Got it.
as well as create policies that encourage growth.
Got it. Thank you.
Stronger action, John.
Yes. I like that. Stronger. Less passive. Fred.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Catch me up on what the next steps we're going to do and when we're going to get to the next pages here.
Yeah, so I have next steps sort of at the end of all of this, figure out how we want to move forward with this. But we are on the second page of economic development.
Yep.
And so when we're done with this, then we'll move forward. We'll take a break and then we'll move on to, we already did homelessness. We'll move on to public safety.
Yeah, good. Now, this meeting. Yeah.
Yeah,
all right.
this meeting right now. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. No, I mean, we've been working on this for months, and I want to get it done.
And you've done good.
Thank you.
Proud of you.
John.
Are we on page 2, Jeff?
We are on page 2, yeah.
I'd add on this down a bit. To be successful in this work, community partners. I think some important ones are missing, like unions. Maybe you call it the trades, however you want to phrase it.
Sure.
But like we did that CWA thing with an intent of growing the economy. So
Okay.
unions are important. Alaska General Contractors. I think Fred mentioned the railroad. Also including them. I mean, they got our gravel pits. We got Powder Ridge. That's pretty key. A lot of industrial land out there that we expect.
Water.
And then, BOMA again. Going to add that on.
Got it.
It's important. This is an important part here because I think a lot of our projects, we have an outreach to people and having a list here so we know, okay, we got something. Here's our checklist of groups to make sure they're notified. Would be helpful. And of course, community councils is default.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so I think changing that up. So, yeah, go ahead.
That's the first time I've heard that recommended, which is kind of a public process outreach notification list. Man, I think that's very wise. I think it's very wise, and I think we ought to separate that from this conversation and build that into something.
Yeah, so maybe you weren't there when I talked about it, but that is something I'm working with the clerk's office on, of building a checklist of, okay, have you done this and this and this and this and this?
And that could go in our communications plan too.
Yep.
It's wise. Before we break, I would like to take a moment of privilege and introduce Michael Willis back here. He is an intern that has come to me from UIA through Kim Pace's class. Thank you, Mr. Dunbar.
Oh, great.
Welcome.
Great.
Yay. Fantastic.
Good.
Yeah, I'm meeting on Monday with the potential attorney. Excited for that. All right. Okay, so then moving on, I really want to get this one done and then we'll break. So short-term, long-term goals, we good with that? I think that encapsulates the discussion we had pretty well. There might be some pieces of these that I'm going to want some advice in the administration because they're sort of already moving on them. We're done. Yeah, Chris.
There's one thing that's not here, and that's analytics of some kind. Benchmarks, measures, some kind of a way for us to know.
You mean separate from the ones that the different departments already provide?
Well, it says convene discussions surrounding roadblocks, development, implementation. So we'll revamp the website. We would be well served to have benchmarks on economic development in the community. So maybe it is what they're already reporting to us, maybe it's additions to what they're already reporting to us. I don't know, but a data-based approach would be wise to have at least this one plank of this effort.
Okay.
Because again, that goes to the arguments that people say, well, it's what's killing our economy is we can't afford to build because you're charging us too much for building permits. Maybe that's true and maybe that's not. What's the data?
Got it. So then it sounds like that might actually fit better in sort of what the questions that we have to help frame this. So I'll think about that. Sorry, John, were you in? Yeah, go ahead, Pete.
No, go ahead.
You sure? Okay, well, I'm wondering, we've got this funding that they're using to try to develop small businesses, sort of a grant funding thing where you...
The angel fund.
Angel fund,
Yeah.
that's I couldn't think of the word, thank you. And so where does that fit in here?
Yeah, right now we don't really talk about small business funds. We don't explore expansion or creation of additional funds. Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, you know, most businesses that are developed in Anchorage would be small businesses.
Right.
And so it seems like that angel fund thing might be something that we could use or designate to, you know, to increase development. So.
Sure. Yeah, I know that there are some potentially interesting things happening with that. So yeah, I think it's good to talk about it.
Right, it's quite, you know, that's an ongoing fund too, and I don't think it's underused too. They're having a hard time finding projects that qualify, which is disappointing really. So, but that's a true reason. I think it's Joe Morrison.
Joe Morrison was the person.
Chris, who's doing the angel fund?
I thought it was still Joe Morrison.
Joe,
so
yeah,
if
it's all-
if it's not, that's news.
It'd be interesting to have Joe come in and give us a recap somewhere. I don't know when that would fit in, but status report.
Yeah,
But then
yeah,
as far as the
okay.
data goes, we don't want to, I mean, there are already sources of that. It's like, you know, AEDC does their luncheon thing and they do their report. That gets a good kind of broad view of it. And then home builders do one too. Their data is mostly South Central though. It's not just Anchorage. That's been a drawback on theirs. But I think they're within their organization hoping to break that Anchorage out.
Well, in my theory, though, it's not just housing. That was just one benchmark example. There's a number of planks for economic development. It would be awesome to see them put in some kind of dashboard that's functional with real core data. I don't know. More than just housing. They're just the ones we hear from the most.
Yeah, but if we have labor, Department of Labor, break stuff out. I mean, the data's there. I don't want to, we certainly shouldn't be
Agreed.
gathering the data. Maybe
Yes.
harvest it from somewhere else.
Yeah, definitely our intent here is not to create more jobs, more work, right?
Where's our budget
to
analyst?
do all
She's
of
not
this.
busy.
Yeah.
He's got time.
Right, exactly. Okay, so then we'll go ahead and move on from the goals. If you have any additional thoughts, just send it to me. Okay, and I think we've added quite a few to the partners. Any additional to the partners? Okay.
Can I?
Oh, sure.
I was just going to say, yeah, I think it's almost excluding people when you just do a small list and you've added a couple others. So that's it. And there's all sorts of groups like the Bankers Association who were very offended by our foreclosure registry when we didn't include them. And so there's a whole list. I love Chris's idea about clerks doing this outreach checklist. Sort of your stakeholders, but so that was my only concern there was that just as a reader it seems exclusive. You say these are our business partners and you list 8 of them, then the other 10 people you didn't list are aggravated with
Got it.
you.
So I'll find a way to make sure we
Maybe
don't
to be
aggravate
developed.
people.
No, but we could like.
I think it's a whole process we should engage in conversation because that is an opportunity for us to do our job of connecting with people we're legislating. So and that's we legislate in 360 degrees, and so that list should be very robust.
Yeah.
Maybe a separate P&P where you have this whole list versus sort of insulting people in this list.
Thank you. Okay, so then moving on to accountability. So specifically those 3 bullet points, is that sufficient accountability measures? Do we want to add anything?
Felix?
Yeah.
Going back to that paragraph above with the points raised by Crystal and John about that largely out of control of the meeting.
Sure.
Probably revising that part to match the earlier phrasing
Sorry.
about removing, while the overall economy is affected by forces largely
Oh.
out of the control of the municipality.
Got it.
I'm
Okay.
just assuming that for consistency with the previous part, maybe
Yeah.
tweak that.
Okay. Yeah, we can do that. All right, so those three sound good on the accountability measures. Very crystal.
So is there a survey that goes out to ask businesses whether or not it's easy to interact with? I mean, how do you actually measure that? What
Yeah.
format do you use to get that information?
So there are existing surveys that are done, right? AEDC does a survey.
Well, what were we planning here though? If it's easier for businesses to interact with the
Oh.
city, how do you get that data?
Yeah, that's. How do we get that data?
I think we do. Chris, the Public Works does regular surveys, right, of the customers there.
Okay.
Public Works, I'm not sure of building safety.
Building safety.
Yeah.
But people going to the counter there, aren't they? Some of the comments I've seen addressed, Joe at the counter is great, Sally stinks or something. So
Yeah, through the chair, we actually provide
Not real
an
names.
on-site kiosk at the permit counter that allows anybody in the building to submit a survey after they've had a particularly good or bad experience. It's also available online. They can do it at any time.
And can I?
And we look at those regularly. We look at those regularly, and those are part of our performance measures that we do quarterly with OMB.
So what kind of response do you get? What numbers do people really? Do a lot of people take those surveys?
Oh, I'd have to go back and look. It depends on the season. Obviously, the late summer season is more busy than early spring. But I'll get you those numbers. It's typically below 100, so it's
Okay, well that's a
not
good.
big.
That's a good number then. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, don't worry about tracking it down.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Yeah, Fred.
Yeah, and that last one. I think must be endemic in our form of government. People, a representative form of government. People just don't pay. Many people don't pay much attention till their ox gets gored, i.e., bags.
That's your example.
Animal protection, and so on and so forth. And I wish that we had a list like, here's all the people that I'd be interested in land use or building stuff. And we just had a way that they all got notified. And I keep telling the advocacy groups, i.e. the veterinarians or the whatever, you guys with your professional society need to have somebody in your organization that's paying attention and so on. And it's what he keeps talking about here too. How do we get the people both involved and informed, and so on. And I don't mean to be cynical, but my experience is it's really hard to get the population. And we could do all the things, and at some point, when we have a limited amount of money, you have to make some decision, do this or that. And I think it'd be wonderful to do everything you'd like to see done, but it's going to be many hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it's going to take permanent staff and a library and all kinds of things and so on. But I'd like to disperse that responsibility out to the user groups and so on and so forth. And but that's a very good thing to ask the building community, the development community. Bullet one: how to make it easier for business, and I might add public service people, social services people.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm preaching, but it's important.
All right. Thank you. Chris?
So one thing I've been working on with the IT department is an analysis of the public's ability to access our work. And the system that we have right now is cumbersome. It's the best technology 1995 could buy in terms of its accessibility. And they have committed to helping to build a better system that allows public members to access items they're interested in. And when matters that are in that sphere of their interest are on our agenda or coming up, they will be notified.
Yeah,
So
that's exactly.
I'm working with them, and they picked it as a project of special interest for their teams to analyze and review. And I'm hopeful within several months, we are going to be seeing an evolution in the conversation about how we provide access to our business, to the public. So that's a conversation that I'm definitely engaged in.
And it needs a great search engine.
It needs, yeah, good searchability, accurate records, and affinity access. You can pick your affinities.
Thank you. John?
Just a comment on that. We used to have a better system than we have now. 15 years ago, I was on e-alerts or whatever they called it, and you could check what you wanted by community council area or by topic, and you get an alert and say, oh, this is coming up. And that has been gone for 7 or 8 years. And I'll tell you, if you're a community council person, that was totally hobbling our ability to do our work.
Agreed.
So it's to get public involved, we need to do something like that that truly works.
I'm haunting the fourth floor.
That's excellent.
Good job. All right. So then, if we don't have any changes here, then any final thoughts on this one? All right. So we're going to go ahead and take 5, and then we'll do public safety.
The ideas that are the implement of the economic development on the next page.
So that's just notes from the various meetings that we had.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was going to bring it up there, but I want us to pay attention to economic development stuff. The reforestation, getting plants back on barren land, giving people incentives and not clear cut the lot, and that was mentioned in the climate plan thing. And there's some groups here in the city are working on it, but that can have a very significant impact on the climate here and the attractiveness of our city. And yeah.
Thank you.
You gotta plant trees.
And you could put that in the top of the page here on priorities for economic development.
Mm-hmm.
Put reforestation or greening or whatever word works.
Okay. Great. Okay.
Brett,
Yes.
on the lot clearing,
We on break?
we have a lot clearing ordinance.
Yeah.
I worked with Dan Sherman on that way back when. And it was hugely controversial. And we were required to have a lot clearing ordinance by the feds because we were a non-attainment area for air quality.
Oh.
And a lot of it is
Yeah,
being
yeah.
cleared, and I got dust and so on. And so you say, okay, well, don't clear your lot until you're ready to sell or develop it or something. But to sell it, it's easier to sell more valuable. You go in, you clear it, you plant it, now you've increased its value. And someone looking for property can look at it and understand the terrain, the size better. So that goes against your law. So our current rules are very light. You pretty much do what you want if you use a chainsaw, but if you use mechanized,
So bulldozer
then it's a little bit higher. So, but if you use a chainsaw, you're pretty clear. So, no, it was enough to get by.
Yeah.
It was their fault. But it doesn't address aesthetics necessarily.
So I'm always on the carrot.
But whatever, except not really, because I need to turn that into today. Understood.
Reduce people's taxes.
Well, you know,
What's up?
the stormwater utility offers a mechanism for that. You say, if you clear your lot, you just increased your fee for the stormwater utility. If you leave it in the natural state, it would be lower. So that is a natural outcome.
Yeah. And then, so it doesn't have to be trees. You know, it's a track, you know, you see that what DOT puts along the roadsides and the cuts. I mean, those kind of grasses, and they've got some really hardy ones. And as my wife says about me, it's far better than nothing. And, you know, so I'm interested in building stuff. So I just do that. So we say to you, you got that marijuana alongside your place or whatever. If you'll plant grass and it's up and surviving, we'll give you 3 times your cost against your taxes. Credit against your taxes. But there's not a good reason. There's no good reason to not do it. And particularly if it's an incentive, as opposed to a penalty. And all of us will bitch and moan about the administration losing the revenue.
I mean, I didn't do it for tax.
I did spend
A couple of years on tax.
If we don't lose the revenue, we shift it to something else. That's how the tax cut is.
Yeah.
If you pay less,
You have an
we pay
exemption.
more.
Yeah, it won't be one for one.
It's spread out.
Yeah.
There's a property, Lake Otis in O'Malley,
That was an interesting note from Jess.
that had a few little buildings on street, 13
Did you read her
acres or
notes?
so.
The notes in the.
And they had a little Montessori
They
school
sent back
for many,
just
many
there.
years.
Oh, yeah.
That closed down.
It was.
The owner had a dream of
Most
putting
of the people that we've had.
apartments
Yeah.
there.
And some of it.
He
Yeah.
died,
Are we going
kids
for
didn't
it?
share that dream.
Question.
But they
Well, not only that,
never
but just how we
really
frame
thought
the
they got
language.
rezoned.
Those things like.
And just 3 years ago, someone else got some special limitations on it. And then the Valley Road project came, and sold it again to Cooley, who's a, and they just built.
Nominating Barbara for an award in email.
Store the dirt needed for the Valley
We
project.
should do that.
So it created more clarity for
I
that.
thought about that earlier.
And now it's sold again to someone
They
who
always
wants to
have this
develop it for seniors.
Yeah.
Municipal employee of
But
the
it's
year
been,
thing or whatever.
this all started when I was on.
Yeah.
And it's been increasingly clear, but these are things we're declaring, and maintain the process to work well with that.
That's right, Pete, you and I get those, not.
I think appropriate for that area.
We'll be reviewing the, so we kind of went through a lot of transitions.
Right, so now it's clear, it's level, we are really ready for
Yeah.
development, but it's clear
So-
layout. But you wouldn't want to go, if you put grass on it, they were actually, when we had the big windstorms, huge amount of dust came down there. You could see why you want grass on there.
Yep.
So Father Shooty and the gang got together and forced them into clearing it, getting hard surface on it.
What's today?
And they finished like a week or two ago.
Is that for the
Grass,
weather?
the slopes and so on.
11 days. Do you ever
It's the 11th.
advocacy
Are we
groups
going into-
really into that?
We're gonna go on public safety like right now.
Do I work with them?
Have you ever?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I'd want to ask the question, what can we do to make it better, to make more happen, particularly on the incentive end? And I don't know anything about tax relief, but we'll find out officially. Yeah.
Actually voted against the rezone to that property from R7, R3 or whatever. It's a place where I live.
So finishing installing the bollards along Windsor Park to the 17th, so that sidewalk project will finally finished.
So, John,
And I never.
we're in a public meeting, so I don't mind saying this on the record, but yesterday at the Taco Campbell Community Council, we got a marijuana applicant. I forget which type he is. He's probably retail. And he is going to be applying for a variance, so you're going to see that in your, potentially, in your committee soon. Apparently he is close to a church of Scientology, which I did not know we had one.
Wow.
Awesome.
Some controversy as to whether or not they're religion.
Actually, church, yeah.
Yeah.
We don't call them churches in the code. Taku Lake, I heard a crazy story last night. That a man was walking his dog, the dog's off leash, swimming in the water, and some unknown animals, likely river otters, a number of them came up and dragged his dog under the water at least two or three times. He waded into the water to save his dog and was attacked himself.
Well, otters?
Otter or beaver?
I thought it would be beaver, but they believe it was otter.
Wow.
Like big fish. So crazy, like the dog got pulled under
Is
the
the
water.
dog okay?
Yeah. The dog survived. So he didn't report it. I'm like, you gotta tell the health
Yeah,
department.
yeah, yeah.
We need to know.
Absolutely.
So,
What
I mean,
otters
we
do
have
you-
rabid
they eat
otters, we need to know.
dogs?
river otter, apparently, they are carnivorous and they are known to kill turtles and other animals that are their own size. I've never heard of them ganging up. And then I was told the guy got bit himself as he was rescuing his dog.
And he didn't report that.
That's crazy. Well, I was told he may have called the state. I'm waiting to get the full details, but Taku Lake.
Well, even if you went, would you go to the emergency room and say, hey, I just got bit by
Depends how
something?
bad the injury was. I heard he got a rabies shot. He went and got a rabies
Well, then,
shot.
okay, then they should have been reporting it.
Yeah. I don't know what the report would be for that. Like, who do you report a river otter attack to? It's certainly not in the code.
I thought it was, you had to get a series of rabies.
I mean, it's
could
any
be.
kind of animal, you know, I mean,
Yeah, I
I don't
know.
care if a possum bites you, you have to report that.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Porcupine, was it been bit by a porcupine?
Well, Taku Lake, beware of the underwater
It might be a good result.
carnivores.
Might do a lot different.
All right, so now that most of us are back, I want to start public safety. I want to see if we can get done with this one. And then, as usual, I did not schedule enough time, so we'll have one more after that. We'll find time to get that last one done. So, public safety is framed in a very similar way as economic development was, starting off with the history, discussion of the ideas, mission, questions, etc. So, we'll start with the history, which I believe is the first 3 paragraphs. Any thoughts on those first 3 paragraphs?
Solemn duty. Wow. Solemn. Leave it in there. I like that.
Playing around with my words, yes. Yeah. Crystal.
You know, I don't know that I have anything really specific, but it seemed to me there was a lot of just opinionating in this. I mean, you know, we want people the people that don't feel safe in their parks. This is unacceptable. Well, okay, the public should feel safe in public spaces. But then you go on and say that there's a significant percentage of the public which does feel safe in the municipality. So, I mean, if we know that information, if we have that information, I don't know that we have to do the commentary on it.
We don't though. We don't have like a percentage or a public perception poll or any of that kind of
But
stuff.
you're saying, though, that we hear from many of our constituents that don't feel safe. Okay,
yeah, we do.
that's a valid, fair statement.
Yep.
And then the other statement, we also hear that there's a significant percentage, and you just say significant percentage. If there's not a percentage, then don't use that word.
Okay.
But then you can also say, you know, that we do hear from the public, which do feel safe in the municipality, regardless of what they see or hear. So you're kind of saying, I mean, it's fair and valid, I think, to say that we hear some people who feel they're safe and some who don't.
Right.
But when the commentary goes in, you know, this is unacceptable, the public should feel safe in public spaces, it just kind of, it becomes too much of a commentary rather than just dealing with what we know.
Okay.
And that's kind of what I was getting at is the more we can just be pretty straightforward about a lot of this rather than having an opinion on it is probably better.
Okay, got it. John?
You know, I'd like to think that what we're doing here transcends our time on the assembly. It's much longer, and focus on that. And you know, I'd say, you know, I'm not happy that we cut our police force substantially during the Sullivan administration, but we had very low crime for a long time. I mean, in the 90s it was really bad, and then it was low. So we did not need police. So I wasn't there, and you know, his seat. Did he make a bad decision? You know, would we have needed 425 police officers in 2000? Crime is pretty low, probably not. So you would cut the number of police. So I think one thing is picking on that. This is very our looking right now view, and if 10 years from now someone will go, huh? So I would delete all this picking on Sullivan, leave that to Dick Cheney. You know, but this much of our current predicaments, you could say, from decreasing our police force, and when crime rose, we had to chase it, and that's been a problem. without a doubt. But, I wouldn't cast aspersions or anything. I mean, at the moment, it may have been a wise decision.
I think the other thing that was going on at that time too, which maybe we're still, sorry, can I?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Sorry. They're typically in a wartime or some kind of military action, we tend to get a lot of military trained people then. And that's really what happened when we had people that were applying to the police forces. They were applying to the state troopers because they came out of the military having been trained for that. So, we saw that in the late 90s, after Desert Storm, and then certainly it's picked up again, sorry, that would be, early 90s, but anyway, it picked up again in the late 2000s after Iraq and Iran. So now we did, there was a time where we really didn't have a lot of people to choose from that were applying for those jobs, and it was even hard to get candidates to be able to put them into an academy. And so maybe that's part of it too, in terms of why we saw the reduction in academies. But obviously now we do need more of them. So I would agree that if we can stick as much as possible to kind of the facts rather than the commentary, we'll probably be better off.
Sure. Thank you. Fred?
Yeah. I want to learn to be wiser in what I say. The fact that we lead the nation by 3.5 or 4 in child sexual abuse, rape, sexual assault, domestic violence, and that isn't highlighted here. Just really surprised that for that class of victims that we haven't got it as here as nearly our highest priority. And if I was our critics, I'd say, those guys are only interested in things that have a dollar impact in our community and affect the people that vote for them and support their campaigns. None of that's true, but that's what the pattern looks like, and I overstated that, but I just can't, in my mind, think of anything more important for us to do than to protect children and victims of violence. So,
thank you. Yeah, you're right. It's not really mentioned predominantly in here. So.
Say it again.
You're right. It's not mentioned predominantly in here. Thank you for that, Crystal.
And so, and just along that same vein, I think it would be good for us to list some of the challenges we do have. It's not just about people on the trails; it's people on, downtown sidewalks or in their homes. We have a lot of things going on, and so all of those things are worth, maybe even suicide. I don't remember if that one was mentioned as well, but. So it would probably be better off rather than kind of doing just a running commentary, maybe be more pointed about specific things that we know we deal with. Like Fred said, we kind of lead the nation in a lot of real unpleasant statistics, and we probably should at least acknowledge that.
Sure.
I also think that the third paragraph, this negative perception of public safety in our city and the knowledge that we have made significant progress in the last few years, I'm not sure we can say that. Because I think we would have to really identify where that significant progress is if we've made significant progress. So anyway, I do think there probably is a negative perception about that the public is safe in this city. So that might actually be worth saying, but I was kind of wondering where that quantification came from on the significant progress.
Sure. Chris?
Thank you. I agree with nearly everything said by all three of you, in particular, John, that we should frame this in the context of overarching time, not specific to the specifics of John Smith or, whoever we might disagree with in the past. So I think that's a wise framing. Let's lift ourselves up and I think it's great to include those statistics, and I would offer that we have made significant measurable improvement. In only one case I could point to right now would be we've reduced car thefts
I was gonna say
by
car theft.
more than half in the last year.
Yeah.
And
And
that's
small property crimes.
and small property crimes, unless you live close to this part of town. But yeah, and so
Well, then we should state it.
right, and so I bet you there are a number that we could come up with to demonstrate the significant improvements that are happening. Some of them are outputs like quicker response time by APD. Some of them are outcomes like half as many cars being stolen. But I think we can demonstrate that, and we should.
Yeah, I think we need to.
And then maybe make that a category that we work over time, which again gets back to a dashboard data idea.
Yeah, but I think we'll see any improvement if you go back perhaps 18 months, maybe 20 months. That, you know,
Since you got aboard.
Yeah.
All right. Suzanne, then Pete.
Thanks, Felix. I was going to address what Chris talked about with the progress issue, and I was going back to the attached pages and trying to remember some of our conversations. And I think, like, to that when we were talking about the number of police in progress.
Outputs.
Right, that part. But I think Chris covered it. Thanks.
Thank you. Pete.
Well, I think one of the areas where we made some progress is we greatly reduced the number of veterans who are homeless. When we first started doing the count, the number was in the dozens, and now you can count them on one hand, so we have made some progress there. We also are running fewer people over to emergency because they're not ODing as much on whatever. Spice especially.
Even though it's still out.
That's way down compared to what it was.
2015 was the worst.
So, we still got a ways to go, but we have definitely made some progress in some areas. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Got it. So I have all of those additions to provide more context and framing for the history and where we are. Let's go ahead and look at the ideas paragraph, which is the 1, 2, 3, 4th paragraph in that first page on public safety. Does that feel like an adequate summation of the discussion? And just for you, Fred, I defined ACEs. You're welcome.
Say that again.
I defined ACEs just for you.
Spelled it out.
I spelled it out. Adverse childhood experiences.
No acronym.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
All of us non-literate people.
Yeah, because when we were in the legislature, that stood for Alaska's Clear and Equitable Share.
Oh,
It was
that's right.
the name of a oil tax bill.
Back when we still got production.
And if I might, if any of you, other than Mr. Weddleton and myself, read every line of that board report from the Senate, they had like 200 acronyms, and there's going to be a table of 3 pages of acronyms at the back of the final document.
It is ridiculous. And yes, I did read every line. Ridiculous.
I only know Mr. Weddleton did because they told me they received his comments or inputs. They heard from me. So.
They got my short version. Why don't just on that? The administration really went through.
Really,
very substantial.
that table was amazing.
Yeah.
I can't even read it without glasses.
All right. Okay, so going back to this. All right, it sounds like we're good on that summation. That sounds like a pretty good overview of what the discussion we had. All right, so goal. John, do you want to start?
I'll move that to the top.
Thank you.
And I would certainly add what Mr. Dyson said is, highlight domestic violence, child abuse, and so on, which I think we saw stats go down, but not violent crime. Is that right?
Violent, yeah, that's record still. That is an area we need to figure out, especially with the news this week.
Well, yeah, we just had a recent.
One of the scariest ones ever.
Oh,
Got it. Does that goal sound good? Not sound good. But is that goal good? Does that sound like we're going to go? Second sentence in that paragraph, we must continue. ...
What paragraph?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5th paragraph. First page of public safety. The assembly has a clear mission. Second sentence of that one.
So I think then taking into consideration what folks have just been saying, then might we also add to reduce incidents of violent crime and crimes against children and vulnerable people?
Sure. So
crimes against people.
Yeah,
It's
but
all
I
of
think
them.
he wants it to be more specific, and I think it's fair that we call some areas out, and the violent crimes are the ones that we haven't yet got a handle on. The murder are still like near record levels.
Yeah.
You know, if not record, pretty close, and that's counter to all the other statistics, and so that is a good area to drive.
Okay, yeah, we can do that. Fred?
Yeah, and all these crimes against people, but particularly when it's a very vulnerable population. And I've faced real terror a few times in my life. You feel powerless to resist, you know, and it's terrifying. And there are places, if I was a woman, I wouldn't want to walk at night in this town. And we just ought to not have that reputation, that there are places not safe to go.
Yeah, thank you.
And most of you, in lots of places, you would let your kids out.
Okay, so then moving on to questions. So I had a lot of questions. Feel free to tell me, delete some of those, or frame them differently. This is. Oh, okay. It isn't. It's there.
So there's a missing item here that is missing in another paragraph as well.
Mhm.
And under the questions and what role will the state play, we also have to ask ourselves what role will the feds play, because a lot of these criminal activities are, they have a nexus to the federal government. The FBI is involved, and they also have resources. The Department of Justice can help on specific resources. And so there we should reference the feds, and on the paragraph on the backside, third to the last, it's the assembly need to work with.
Oh, right.
We should identify the Joint Task Force, the FBI, and an additional set of resources that are at play, that are doing a lot of good work here, and we need to recognize it. So
Okay.
they're partners. At that,
Last meeting.
of which one?
Public safety.
What about the youth court on there? Do we want to add that?
Yeah, I can add that. It's a good one.
And
All right. So going back to questions, what's yours on
yeah,
questions?
just when the question, how many treatment beds? Can we just say treatment facilities or something, because it doesn't necessarily. It can be an out.
The bed
I don't
days are
want-
important.
Yeah, the bed.
I
number
know
is
they
important.
are, but I'm saying all forms of treatment are, and we don't really have. I mean, even outpatient types of treatment have value. So I'm just thinking that we don't necessarily. Do we want to distinguish that
Maybe
point, or just or
units of
add another?
treatment.
Sorry.
Units of treatment, right? Because the way that the conversation
Okay.
happens at the state level, they unitize it. Units
Right.
available at outpatient or residential
Okay,
or inpatient or detox.
Yeah.
And so we could just
We need
unitize
both.
it. Yeah, all of it.
Right.
Got it.
Okay.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay. Yeah, just a way to broaden out a bit.
Sure. All right. So then, don't see any more thoughts on the questions. All right. So then, moving over to the role. So that's on the top. The Assembly and Public Safety Committee's role. Does that sound fair?
Well, there's what I think it was Mr. Weddleton previously suggested is that we should say set
Yeah.
policy.
Yeah.
And so,
Sorry.
no, that's good. I would just add that there.
Okay. Moving over to short-term, long-term. Those all sound fair. Change things up. Do we want to talk about, just keeping with the theme of what Fred's been mentioning, the violent crime?
Well, I know what his short-term goal is. Test the kids. That's one thing that he continues to say. I personally am working on a small project that, I don't know if you all have heard about this at all, but I'm working with APD and some bike advocacy groups, and we're going to be coming up with a campaign to educate the public on how to secure their bikes, and at the same time do some intensive enforcement of bike thievery that's going on with some high-value bikes that will end up probably with some real prosecution. And so we're engaging in a conversation with prosecutors, advocates, et cetera. That's, for me, one of the short-term goals. It doesn't need to go on this list, but as the Rules Committee, this is what I'm working on. FYI. Thank you.
Yeah, Fred, go ahead.
Yeah, when we're talking about public safety, we need to have a serious discussion about should we move into prosecuting some felonies. And Bill was right when we're out with it. It's legal. It is purely a tactical decision. If we start doing more of the state will back off even more. In the meantime, our citizens are being hurt. Crimes are not being prosecuted, because they fall into that gap. And we've got a hard decision to make. We can't talk about public safety if we don't talk about prosecuting the bad guys. 2 weeks ago, a guy was masturbating at a school bus stop, and the state won't prosecute it.
We have a new law.
Yeah, I mean, that's...
Yeah.
It just bothers me. So we need to have a strategic decision about it. And my personal policy is always do the right thing now. Don't get shut down by a possible future threat to keep you from doing the right thing now. And public safety, pardon me for being a harp, but public safety's got to be amongst the top things the government's supposed to do.
That's what I wrote.
And in 2017, state didn't do 7,000 prosecutions of felonies. I'll bet a significant portion of those were in our backyard. So we got a tough decision to make. And maybe that's a thing that we could quantify and put on the ballot that would sell for elevating the tax cap for public safety. But please, let's schedule it, and whatever we need to do to help us make the right decision. And I think the administration is open.
So then are you suggesting adding that as a short-term goal is suggesting avenues to increase prosecution? What are you suggesting?
But it's crossing the felony threshold. That's the River Styx, but there's a risk. But the risk is a monetary. But we've already got this risk of criminals being free to go on about their career because we don't prosecute them.
Yeah, Crystal.
Can we ask Dee if she might comment on that? Not that you would have any numbers or specific dollars amounts, but what do you think that would look like?
Can I add to that question as well? A second part to that question. Can you give us just a brief update on the efficacy of our partnership with the state, embedding the prosecutor in their system? Because that was the compromise we reached.
Yep.
Okay.
I don't know what the total impact is, but we have embedded partners in the FBI. We have back and forth, and I think the FBI is over Elmore. So we have a whole lot of those arrangements. So I don't know the specifics of that, but I would suggest, by the way, the work session on this, the idea of us, the immunity prosecuting felonies has come up many times, and I think the answers change, but let's say there's 10 factors. You need to be aware of what those 10 factors are to make the decision.
Yeah.
And we have that information, because we've looked at it many times over different periods of time. And so in implementing your goal, do a work session fairly quickly.
May I respond, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and when I talked to our top prosecutor here, she said, we really need to talk to the DA.
Well, maybe we bring in a state person as well.
And because that person has a better idea than we do, what's happening. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Forrest?
Yeah, Fred, I think you were on the body already. We had a very detailed discussion about this that was led by Mr. Croft either 2.5 years ago. Maybe it was even sooner than that. And at the time, I felt it was not a wise course of action. I think I still feel that way. And we can have this discussion more at the work session, but I am not comfortable to put it as a goal yet here, just knowing what I know from that process about. For example, when you start prosecuting felonies, then we need to start paying for felony public defenders. which is a much different level than
Yeah.
the current public defense contract we have right now.
So could we do
And-
something maybe like, and I think Fred started it off this way, which is we at least need to have the discussion. So
Right.
can we make it a goal to sort of
Explore.
review?
Now you can use your word explore.
Yeah.
We just make it a goal to examine
Yeah.
felony prosecutions.
And I've heard that 7,000 felonies not prosecuted. I'm curious. A lot of times people decline to prosecute because it's not a good case. And so I want to see the breakdown of, was it because they actually did not commit the felony in the opinion of the prosecutor, or is it just a resource question?
It was presented to me, written from the Department of Law, and it said the resource.
Yeah.
Clerks, courtroom time, judges,
Yeah.
and prosecutors.
But what you just said there too is another. If it's courtroom time, if it's a judiciary issue, it doesn't matter if it's us or if it's the state that's trying to bring it forward. We're still going to run into that logjam, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And to say, and Fred, we decline an awful lot of cases as well.
Sure.
And it's all resource generally based. I mean, there's some poor prosecution.
And you push them into league now.
Well,
I will say the city is stars at DV prosecution. We are stars in that area.
Well, that's the area that we actually hired a state person to work at the state for us.
Yep.
That saved us all those back-end problems of having to come up with public defenders and jail beds and all those things. And I think whatever work session we have, we should dive as deeply as we can into that question, because if the voters would approve funding outside of the cap or to increase the cap to pay for those services, and we could tenfold increase the state prosecution's ability, that would be a win for everybody.
well, except the state would then, if I was a state and I looked at that, what I would do then is divert resources away from Anchorage and focus on
And
prosecuting
that would have to
other
be part of the
cities.
MOU that made that possible. And so that's the conversation that saves us and gets us closer, rather than us setting up a whole felony
So
show.
you're talking about when we put an ABD officer over there, that kind of thing.
There was a trade,
Yeah.
we did a trade, and it worked out, I think it worked out well, but we haven't had a final report, which we should.
But I just continue to think if we went outside the tax cap, and I agree with you, Fred, that probably people of Anchorage would support that. But if I was the state and Anchorage approved, let's say, $5 million more for felony prosecution, I would look at how many cases they're now taking, and I would take my very finite number of prosecutors, I would pull them out of Anchorage, and I put them in the Valley and in Fairbanks and in rural Alaska.
Yep. But the cost of doing nothing is our citizens are being desperately wounded, and the crooks, the bad guys are going on to do more. We cannot ignore that. We don't have a higher responsibility. And yeah, bad things are going to happen, and other people will be responsible. But our responsibility is to our people.
But I'm saying what you might end up with is the same number of prosecutions, the same number of prosecutors, except now it's us paying for it instead of the state paying for it. And if we just have a pure one-to-one trade-off, unless we're willing to pay and tax more than what the state is currently investing in Anchorage, which is a heck of a lot of money, then we're talking, I don't know, 20, 30, $40 million, like a heck of a lot of money. And then we're also going to be subsidizing the Matsu Valley. And this is always what it comes down to, is we end up endlessly subsidizing the Matsu Valley, and it's infuriating.
I look forward to you having a better idea to protect our people.
Thank you.
Alcohol tax
Thanks,
treatment, diversion, there's one.
All right. So then I'll try to find some way to frame it in here so that everyone can buy into the idea. Let's move on then, if we don't have anything else on goals, to partners. So I've added AYC and various federal partners. Anyone else?
We're on the last.
So yeah, we're on the second page, public safety, the paragraph after the goals.
All right.
Then
Oh, we'll be on just that.
yeah,
paragraph. Okay.
then moving on to accountability. So that sentence that just talks about generally that we should be accountable, and then the metrics.
I might take that easily.
Where?
Yeah, sure, fine. Nothing's ever easy.
Thankfully.
Sure.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. So where would we put something like reducing accidents with pedestrians and bicycle riders? Because we've had at least 3 pedestrians hit and killed this year, and a couple of bicyclists, if not more.
That was a preventable
Isn't
accident.
that under fewer
Vision
preventable?
zero.
No preventable accidents.
But yeah, I think it's worth
Calling it out.
calling it out. I think you're right, Pete.
Pedestrian.
Because after you left to the community council meeting the other day, we had a dissertation for about 20 minutes talking about jaywalking.
From Ed Leach.
From Ed Leach, jaywalking and pedestrians, deaths. So, I mean, that's been his thing. He's been talking about, stopping jaywalking for years.
But he's coming at it from the exact wrong perspective.
But that's it.
Jaywalking wasn't a crime until the automobile industry lobbied to have it become part of the criminal code. Because it was originally seen as anytime anybody hit by a car, it was the car's fault. Because why is this car burning through our city? And they lobbied to change the law to put the onus on the pedestrian. But that's kind of ridiculous. They're not the one. They're not the ones in the 60-mile-per-hour death machine.
Isn't that
On a
what-
road
something
that's
like
built
that?
for 90 miles an hour, wheel drive, we let them do it. So it all comes back to our policies.
Yeah, these deaths are policy choices.
That is true. All right, any other thoughts on the accountability pieces? I think it's a pretty good list. All right, then with that, we do have one more, but we don't have time to go through it today. So we'll schedule some time to go through the last one. And then just to give a brief overview of the plan. So we have another, I think it's November 8th is when it's planned for, to do a final, because we're not going to keep going through this. And then I think the plan is to have it on the meeting of the 19th is the budget, but the plan was to have it on the meeting of the 19th, have formal adoption after we go through final. We can adjust things if we need to, but I really don't want to belabor the point. So that's the general process that we're going to be taking. Yeah.
Just a quick thanks to you, Felix. I mean, just when I was going back over our notes from our discussions, I thought you did a really good job of sticking to what we talked about and putting it in the narrative. So thanks for doing all that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Happy to.
Chair.
Yeah.
Does the clerk's office have a button they can press and our work gets distributed to the media?
Do we have a special button? I know what you meant.
An easy button.
I mean, generally, unless we put something in a press release and ask to be sent to the media, no, it's not.
And respectfully, I think that's dumb. I mean, one of the things that we need to do is get people informed, and we ought to have all the media out there. And you finish the document and it gets approved, and you push a distribution thing, and it happens. And I'm really impressed with the work that you all have done here, including putting a couple of my items in on the side of the Angels. But I think this is really good work, and I think we ought to alert the media that the process has happened, and then let them see our finished product.
Well, the good news is
now that we finally have an ADN report.
Yeah, you're meeting with, he tells me he's meeting with the new ADN reporter for the city beat next week, who I met with yesterday, and now's an opportunity to sell your product.
Yeah.
And then he can see it at the meeting when it's approved.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you will mention that and mention that there was nodding, smiling heads around the table, and then, I mean, it doesn't take a lot of time. I've got a pretty good list on my phone, and I think it's worth having.
Yeah.
And sooner rather than later, and showcase what you've done, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you. What we've done. Yeah, I guess just opining on that topic for a second. What I've been talking with the clerk's office about doing sort of a general media training, because I think there's a lot of aspects of what the city government does that the media really doesn't get. And so it's interesting how we read articles that's like, oh no, John Weddleton did not create the stormwater utility. and things like that.
Much as he wants.
Right. There was one particular piece where, because it says chair at the request of the mayor, someone thought that I had written the proposal and worked on it at the mayor's request. Well, no, that's not how it works. So I think there's some just general education that we need to do for the media. So yeah, we can look at different things that we can do to interact better with the media.
So, if I might add to that, I would be careful in how you frame that. They are, in their own way, the fourth branch of this system that we have, and any approach to them, even if they're not so salted in their experience, I would recommend we approach as a peer-to-peer, if you will, like a eye-to-eye connection.
Yeah.
Because they have a job to do that is in sometimes opposition to us, but they could use this is how we do it, and it should be regular because they turn over so frequently that it's like you have to work hard to train them up and then they're gone.
Yeah, I had talked to the clerk about doing it on an annual basis. Yeah. All right, Pete. Oh, and then Pete and then Dean. Go ahead.
Okay, well, I was just looking at the ideas meeting page, about 7 or 8 down, we got more dispatch support staff, more APD officers, community service officers, and we're actually got money in the budget for park rangers this time.
Yep.
So we could add park rangers to that as well.
So
Actually, I think that'll actually save money in having to remove some of these camps if we stop them before they actually get moved in.
yeah, so we'll have this discussion in a future meeting, but I don't know how we want to incorporate these notes from our 3 meetings that we had that were facilitated in the broader discussion, because really the narrative was supposed to be sort of an amalgamation of all of these notes. So we'll talk in the future about what we want to do with these, if we want to sort of append them as here, you can look at what we talked about in specific. Okay, with that, Dee.
I was just going to say, when you're talking to the media, about 5 years ago, when you only had 1-day training sessions, the media came and talked to the assembly, and nobody was here, and it was, I don't think, and it was excellent. Were you both here?
It was our first intro.
I thought that they gave really great ideas for how to deal with the media.
Yeah.
And that you might want to set that up at the other side of the meeting, that it was really excellent.
Or get some of the older, saltier, more experienced reporters there, with
Exactly.
their reporters there to see us hearing this, so their new guys or girls, ladies, excuse me, get the same deep dive as we do. Right?
Yeah.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
Are there any experienced ones left?
Yes. Maria Downey is still in the business.
Oh, okay, right, okay.
All right, with that, I'll go ahead and open it up to audience participation. Go ahead.
My name is Eugene Carhaven. I represent myself. I live in the Matthew Valley. Follow the public process, and the public process done appropriately. This is made by the governing bodies more likely to public interest. First part, how could the public know what you're going to do? This agenda, the packet, is not on the website for the public to know. But even more, it stands out, is on the agenda, you'll see 3A, Review of Assembly PMP. What does PMP stand for? I saw the title notice and said PMP. Understanding it means policy and procedures. So the public is going to that. And then this item that you went in the first part of the meeting, it's Assembly Operating Policy and Procedure. With my understanding, I have a question to the staff here. This is a draft. If it's a draft, you need to know it is a draft. If this is flying around, as it is, it creates a situation where the public thinks anyone sees it, it's been approved. Okay? But then there would need to be a signature, all that stuff. But the fact is, you are talking about a draft situation, and it's not. And I'm not questioning. And then the other key thing, element of this element is, I'm not questioning your right to adopt policy procedures and all that stuff. That is obvious. That's your role. But when you adopt them, where is it going to go before the public at an assembly meeting? It's more likely going to result in a memorandum or whatever, or a consent agenda in the beginning, and there's no chance of public to protest for or against. So when you do that scenario, the public's not engaged. The end result is something you're doing. It's a major significant thing, and I appreciate your concerns, respect, and make sure you're connected appropriately with the administration on issues that concern you, and questions. The fact is, missing link is the public. And the last part, in reference to what was said earlier, about the cost that needs to be more engaged. With all due respect, I appreciate that comment, except what I've seen over the years, is when you don't do the process right, connect with people, we have tremendous more costs, reference the port and so forth, with the lack of engagement. Think about how much money could be saved if you appropriately connect with people on issues, particularly like the port. And that's it, with the profits made. 30 seconds to spare.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to participate?
Oh, can I just put on the record? I brought my own food. I don't want you to think I just,
You're fine,
Eugene.
Thank
You allow me, but I don't. I bring my own food, and I just want to put on the record that I'm not. I see you're eating sandwiches, and that it came from outside. Okay?
I appreciate it. Thank you. All right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and